Welcome to this recap video of my Crazyhouse Worldchampionship match yesterday against xuanet. As you may know, I won that match, and I am now in the candidate stage of Crazyhouse World Championships, which is set to begin in a couple of days/week, I hope. So that's of course very nice for me that I got that far, and we'll see how good I will do in the next stage. But I wanted to show my games from yesterday and share my thoughts with you, since it's been a while that I did a video like this. I thought it would be nice. I covered the moves and the stockfish evaluation with my face, so you won't be distracted by that. And certain moments I will give you opportunity to pause the video, and then maybe you can find the right move. If you don't want to do that, just keep on watching. I won't take long pauses. Just note that you can pause the video and then move on quickly. Alright, so the first game, xuanet was playing with white, and he almost exclusively plays e4. So I'm just playing knight f6 and knight c6 and d5 and see what he wants to do. There are a couple moves here. e5 is common, as well as e takes d5 is played a lot. So, and he plays bishop c4, still okay, and almost the only move here is to play e6. If you take the knight, for example, then white will have a very strong attack after a move like bishop takes f7, and then just take the knight back, and you can see the black king is very exposed over there. So e6 is played in the opening. Knight f3, bishop b4, bishop d2, and this is all, I'd say, theoretical. Sometimes the bishop is on b5, sometimes it's on e2. There are a little bit of nuances here. I played knight at e4 to go after the c3 pawn here, and it also gives some control over g5, where these pieces might go later. So xuanet, maybe he should have castled, as he did in a later game, tried to give up the pawn for activity. What he did was also interesting. He played pawn at h6, trying to go for a very aggressive game. And apparently here I should have played pawn at h3 to try to disrupt white's king from castling. And if something like this happens, well, you can see the g file is coming available for the rook, and I might just take on c3 and then do something over there. And sometimes in these positions it's also an idea to put a pawn on e3 and then bust open the position like this. But I felt, let's take on d2 instead, and then I wanted to put a bishop on f4 later. But yeah, the problem I came by is that he can just play this, and he takes on d5. I have to take back with the pawn. If I take with the queen, there's knight f6 check. And he just has a very comfortable game here. I don't have any way of attacking the queen once he played pawn e3. And my king is not safe at all. I'm not up material, so I think white's just better here. So I tried to muddy the water a bit with bishop at b2. And here xuanet went for a very interesting idea. He's trying to use the weakness of the dark squares around my king. Probably best was just to take on d5. And if I take on a1, you just take on c6. And Maybe here you play bishop f8 still, or just castles. Looks like an option as well. White is better here. But he played bishop at f8 and white's still probably good. But it gave me some time to pick up material. I could take on a1, or like I did in the game, I can also take on c3. It just takes, and pawn at e7 I thought was gonna be a problem. If I take with the knight, I made it in one. And these two very important squares are covered by the knight and the bishop, so there's no way I'm checkmating soon. So here you have to play something like this. And now white has multiple threats. Queen at f8 threatens mating patterns. Knight at f6 will force the king up, and then the rook can be taken. So it's just a very problematic position. So that's why I took on a1, and maybe I thought I could use the rook on the back rank. But he played at e7, and here I took immediately. In the game I was sort of thinking short moment about this, but I'm not sure if he can just play king e2, or I wasn't sure about that. It feels like he can. Knight takes c3, he just takes, and knight at f6 again. The strong idea that was present in the position all the time. So that's not working. Here there's bishop takes d5. And the rook on e1 is not going to do anything since it's covered by 3 pieces. And again, if queen takes knight at f6, yeah, this is just almost unguardable. So that's why I didn't play rook at b1 in between, because it looks like a nice move to make him waste the knight, but king e2 is just killing. So I took on e7 with the c knight, of course. This knight needs to guard f6. He castled. I tried to do something on the g file later on. But white is still in a very comfortable position. I took on g7. That's a bit of a rash decision maybe to break open the position like that. But I wanted to make him use the rook on the back rank, and then my only hope is that I can put a pawn on g2 and then a rook on h1. And otherwise I'm never winning this game. I need a rook trade, so that's why I traded on g7. And he immediately played rook h8. I went rook g8, and I should be lost here. As xuanet tried to prove, but he missed all sorts of checkmates here. Let's review the easy one. This was going to be mate. So I went to f8, and here there is a strong sequence for xuanet, and probably one of the best moves is just play something like this or this one, threatening knight takes e6, and that's just completely winning. If you take the rook, knight takes e6, and the king is gonna be forced out in the same manner as we saw before. So this is a very cute little checkmate that was there, but xuanet didn't play queen h6, he just took on g8, and that gave me some chances, because now I have the rook in hand and the pawn. Do note that I have 8 seconds here, so I'm living off the increment. So I just played at g2 here. It's not the best move, it's hanging checkmate, but at least gives me the threat of mate in time trouble for me. So here he had to find knight takes e6, he did, and he's just playing this beautifully all the way. And here's the strong move, bishop takes e7, because if I play queen takes e7, there's a mate in 2 for you to find. And the mate in 2 is rook at g8 and queen takes g8. Same thing happened in the game, but he just took on e7 and he kept on going. Knight at f5. And here there's only one strong move already pointed out. Bishop takes e6 and bishop at d7, queen takes d8. And if I block on c8, it's mate in 1. But xuanet made a mistake here by going knight e7, and suddenly the white's advantage is gone. There's just no way he's winning here. The rook is guarding the 6th rank and all hope is lost, and now I still have the queen, so queen at h1 is just coming and there's nothing to be done about that. This is the move, but then queen g2, so it's just game over. So I got very lucky this first game, very rich game with lots of ideas for xuanet, but he just got lost in the complications, not finding a checkmate there. So it was a bit scary, but alright, second game I was white and I was able to just play my usual d4 d5 system. xuanet just developed naturally, so no quick h4s or whatever. And we have this usual setup. He played a quick h6. It discourages me to play knight h4 and to go after the bishop. So bishop d6, let's say knight h4 here, he goes bishop h7. And the knight is a bit silly over there. But this bishop is available for attack with knight b5. And usually I want to try to trade either this knight for this bishop or this knight for this bishop in this opening. So I can put the bishop on f4 and try to pressure h6, and it's exactly what happened in the game. He castled, I took on d6 and I played bishop at f4, creating a double attack. And you can say this is not really an attack, but I'm getting 2 pawns for the bishop and the king will be open next. So I was happy with that. The computer suggested to play rook c8 here, so you can threaten c2, which will give some counterplay, but probably bishop takes d6 is just fine. Looking at e7 later, and things will be messy here. So knight e4 is a very understandable move. Later on you want to go after g3 and it just covers the pawn. So I went on with the plan. I took on h6 twice. And here you can see there are some weaknesses on the dark squares. Maybe I put a pawn on g5 even later, try to trade the knight, go after f6. The light squares are very nicely covered, but the dark squares aren't. And it's very hard to try to find a good idea here, but he played bishop at h8 and that gave me some points to attack to, because now the king is can only go here and, well, here if the bishop gets removed. So that gave me the idea to go knight h4 here. What I'm trying to do is get rid of this defender and trade the knight, and so I can go for h7 and get the knight on g5. And he was unaware of my idea and he played a move that was helping me even by leaving the defense of the f7 pawn. So he played rook e8, so I traded here. And now you can see that this knight will be even stronger. It was also covering f7. And I thought for a while, and then I found that I can take here. He takes back. I can play at h7 and knight g5. And if he takes my bishop, I have takes f7 since the rook got moved. So this was my initial idea, and here I win the queen. The king has to move somewhere. Let's say it moves to h7. We just take the queen, and it's not like it's made immediately, but it looks very good for white. With the king out in the open, a couple weird defenders around it, no pawns to guard. This is just winning for white. So he sacrificed the queen, which was also winning. Still winning for white, I felt, because I have the threat of queen h6, king g8, something at h7 to checkmate, and I threatened bishop f5 with the fork, so I'm just winning material. He tried to guard both with bishop at g6, so I tried to lure away the attacker. If he takes, we have the checkmate I mentioned. So after at h5 he went bishop f5, and here I found bishop at g6, which was nice. If he takes with the bishop, we can do this. Bishop takes, I believe, yeah, and checkmate. So he had to take with the pawn here, and here I can take with the pawn first, but I saw that the way I went in the game was very strong, and if not winning by force. If he takes with the pawn, he can live on for a little while longer. I mean, this is not winning. So I thought, let's do queen h6 and then take on g6 with the pawn, threatening this, threatening this, and bishop takes g6 won't help. So he played at g7, and here I went for at f7, and I took the rook, took the bishop. White should have played, or black could have prolonged his suffering a little longer with this move, giving us the king a square, but it wouldn't have helped much. I think white is just completely winning. But he took the queen, allowing a nice bishop at f7, and rook at g8 was the maiden one. So this was a very nice attacking game after the first game was lost. I still won the first game, but the second game I was in control after the opening, and I just was happy with my play. So the second game with black, I decided to play e6 instead of d5 on move 3. Switch it up, let's see what he comes up with. And he played a quick e5, and the opening was okay. Again, I'm playing knight e4 here to control some of the squares and maybe take on f2 later. Bishop e2 is not the most critical. Probably bishop b5 is good. Try to make d6 a little bit annoying to play. Something like this. It's always a bit annoying to deal with. But bishop e2 is not like it's wrong. Oh, even though Stockfish said so. But I get to play d6, and he tried to pressure d5. And we trade. And here I was thinking, should I play bishop c5 first or should I play pawn g4 first? I was not completely sure what to do. Probably this is good. But I thought, well, why not play bishop c5? first pressure f2 some more, and maybe here I would have played bishop c5 anyway and retranspose somehow to the game. So bishop c5, and one of the points here was that if you played bishop or pawn d4 I should say, to block out the bishop, then he used his pawn, so he can play bishop b4 check, for example. Ask questions how he wants to deal with this. This is far from ideal, as you'll understand. So probably he has to play something like c3, and then I'll just go back. And here I have the pawn in hand. My pawn on d5 is nicely guarded. This is a good knight, and I should be happy after a sequence like this. Bishop comes out. Black is probably better. So no worries about pawn at d4, and if he doesn't play pawn at d4, then at some moment I will take on f2. So he castled, and now I went at g4. I had to calculate some queen takes d5 stuff, but I wasn't really worried. Something like this could happen. I can take on e2 here, knight at g5 is a possibility. It just looks okay for me. So he took on d5 with the knight. Take on f3. And now I'm going in. But here somehow I got lost in finding the right moves. Knight takes f3 was still okay, but it was with the wrong idea. I thought I could play rook at f5 here, but he has knight at f6, which is very strong. If I take with the pawn, he has knight at g7, and white is winning. But yeah, I already played it, and then at this position I figured, oh, I cannot play rook at f5. So I was searching for new plans. The computer still says it's about equal, but I'm a minute down on the clock, and my king can any moment be attacked with pawn at e7. I always have to worry about that move. Here I tried to be cheeky with at g3, tried to open up stuff, and here he blundered with knight at g5. I should have taken this happened in the game. I took this knight to go for tricks, but I should have taken this knight. If he takes back, it's mate in 1. That's pretty obvious. So it's just a free knight. But I thought the same about the knight on g5 being free, because if he takes, then there will be a checkmate sequence available as well here. Something like this. And variates his transposes, but of course he doesn't have to take on g5. And he played very strong here. He took on c6, then took on c7, and here I realized if I go to f8, well, let's first note that if I go to d squares, the queen is lost with check. That's just game. If I go to f8, he plays knight e6 check. Forcing the king to e7 will result in the same idea. If I take, and e7 still a problem, and the problem with this square was this. And well, I didn't calculate this, but again, this looks not right, and still the same idea is also there. So I had to go to d7, and here I had a very strong defensive resource apparently, which was king d8. Not taking the free knight. It's a very counterproductive move, but there's just no way black is getting attacked, and he's threatening knight at g3, or I'm threatening knight at g3 here, and maybe next move I can save some of my pieces. But yeah, it was hard to figure this out with 7 seconds, so I just took the knight, and now I'm checkmated. And he finishes this nicely with just the pawns, and in the end I lost on time, but there is just no defense possible. The king c4 has to be played, I guess. And up to you to find the checkmate here for white. Shouldn't be too hard. Alright, so 2-1 was the score here. But I got to play with white again, and my first white game was very nice with d4, and I was confident to go back into the same opening. But xuanet wasn't, and he played g6. So I switched to e4, which I think is just a good idea if black plays like this. And knight c6 is a bit inaccurate, I think. You could save the knight here with knight e5. But white will take the center. Has nice development. Push e5 maybe. Looks just good for white from a strategical standpoint. So he decides to give up the knight. But this is already looking very good for me. I played bishop c4, threatening this, and knight g5. So castles, knight at h6, again going after f7, so he has to take. And here I have some choices. I can take the rook, but I'm always a bit reluctant to take the rook and give him this nice defensive setup. Maybe in this case it was fine to play like this, and maybe play knight g5 and go after f7. Probably it is, but I like to play bishop at g7 and just give up some material here. So the computer really wants me to develop, but I just thought let's play e5. And apparently black should play d5 here and try to build this pawn wall around the king. He played knight g8, and this allowed for a very nice maneuver. I played bishop takes f7 here, and the point is that after rook takes, I have knight e6 takes, and I win the queen. And I have pawn at g5 coming with pawn at f6 and pawn at h6, and it's hard to guard this. And king takes f7. There's sort of the same trick. Knight g5, king g7 is forced because of mate in 1. So he went king g7. And here I went for the same idea. I could have played knight e6, but I wanted to control f7. And this is not forcing a queen trade, it's forcing well, it's forcing a queen trade. He can trade, he's not lost, but it also forces an attacking idea afterwards. So rook takes d8, queen f7, something like this. Probably would have transposed into the game. I would probably cast here as well, but he decided to play bishop b4 in between, and now we got rook takes d8. And here I thought for a while, because I always was going to play this, but just figuring out if there was a way to force the king out in the open. If I could do something like this, for example, But then I figured, yeah, let's not risk the king being so open like this. I'm just gonna take on h7 and castle, and here f4 is such a huge threat, boxing in the king, that he's gonna have to deal with that. Apparently there was still some defense possible. Computer says the position is about +10 for white after bishop takes c3. And gives this line king h1 apparently. You cannot play f4 already. King might run, because this is probably losing. So king h1, another calm move, preparing f4. Bishop at f3. And this is something the computer gives as good for white. King out in the open, but not easily checkmated. But yeah, xuanet just made a blunder here, not dealing with f4. And f4 came, and the king just got mated. There was a nice variation if the king moved here. Well, the easy one is of course at e4, and just do the same as in the game. But the nice one was to take on h5. And then sack the queen for content. But okay, we got the king, and we went 3-1 up. So in my white games I was not struggling at all, and in the black games I was. And xuanet was getting an advantage in those games, but so far he only won one of those, where he should have won both, and then we should have had a 2-all position. But I was 3-1 up, and xuanet is sort of in a must-win situation here, otherwise it gets 4-1, and I get the white turn again, where he didn't have any good positions yet. So he went into the same opening, but the last games he played d4, and now he castled. That's the difference. I played at g4, knight e1 was played, and this is a theoretical position, and white will sometimes play f3. Another idea for white is to hope that black develops this bishop too early. d4 is always played, mostly always played, but for example something like this is a nice way of playing for white. Maybe in this particular position queen h4 is working, but let's just say it isn't. This is then sometimes an idea white plays for. This is not about this particular position, since it's king d7. In this particular position queen h4 is probably good, but just remind yourself of this at h6 idea after the bishop is moved. So I went knight at e4 to go after c3, and then push the knight back to d6, cover f7, and maybe go after f5 later on. And that happened in the game. Bishop d3 was played. Let's say you make a move like bishop f4, then black is usually happy when this happens, because now he can go after g2. Queen moves to e2, for example, already lead to positions like this, which is just very uncomfortable. So bishop d3, bishop d7. If white is slow, I will play knight a5 and trade the bishop. But apparently white had a very strong move in this position instead of knight at g6. And um, and you can pause the video here and try to find it if you want to. The idea that white should play here is a knight at g6, because it disrupts black's position entirely. The rook cannot move to h6, it's taken. The rook cannot move to h7 because of knight takes f8 and the rook is taken. The rook cannot move to g8 because pawn h7 is just very strong. So we gotta take this. But now black has a problem. He has to blockade this with the knight. Either this one or knight at f7. Then white has given up the piece, gets 3 pawns in hand. He has 2 pawns up in total, and the knights will be targets with pawn g6 next, and white's just doing very well. So knight at g6 was a very strong move in this position, but not really a human-like move. Knight at g5 is much more natural, you would say. But after you considered all the rook moves after knight at g6, maybe you can find knight at g6 now that you've seen it. I could just play bishop e7 here and try to finish development. Well, not finish development completely because it will hang mate in 1. But apparently I should just play h4 here and try to storm with the pawns. But I thought I could take on g5 and then try to use that knight. But strategically speaking, this was a bad decision because the rook and queen come here. I could have pulled it off apparently if I played this move and then tried to go here and play at e4. But I played knight e4, tried to go after f2. And here he should have played pawn c5, just winning the knight. This knight is only threatening this one, but if you go here, takes. This is just very strong for black. Instead, he didn't play pawn at c5, he played g6, which made my life a little bit easier. Because he went for a queen sack, but I already noticed that this wasn't really a problem because I can play queen f8 at the right moment. So bishop takes g6, rook f7 is a very strong threat. Apparently already I should have played queen f8 here. Rook takes f8, rook takes f8, and this is, even though I just gave up the queen for a rook, this is probably winning for black. Of course, he should not take the queen. He should instead, after queen f8, take the knight. Something like this can happen. And position is probably better for black, but white has some chances to attack with the bishops. And the lack of material in hand for black is also helping white a little bit. Alright, but instead of queen f8 here, I went for the queen sacrifice with queen at e3, which isn't all that bad. It gets the, oh, not take with the knight first, sorry. Which isn't all that bad because the queen is very open, or the king is very open, and black's king is now relatively safe. White's should have blockaded on f3 probably, but instead blockaded on f7, which allowed for rook at f6 picking up the bishop. The only way of not letting me pick up the bishop is to this move. So you can play knight at d5 and then take the rook, as he did in the game. And here he went for knight d3, so his rook covers the back rank a little bit. And yeah, I was getting low on time here, so I tried at f3. And we had this sort of draw-ish shuffle. He played queen at g7, which was a blunder. And I was wondering if I could get out of this somehow. But with very low time, I was happy to take the draw here. You could just keep on doing this forever. And as soon as I take, I don't know if there was a problem, but it felt tricky. I don't know if there is a problem. Looking at the position now, I think rook e8 is playable. Knight would lose, maybe. Something like this. But still, this is not immediately lost. But yeah, with 3 seconds to go and he just putting stuff on g8, I was thinking, okay, I'll just take it and we'll see if we draw. But then he played for the win with queen at g7. But actually that's just leading to a very quick checkmate. And well, you can find the checkmate for yourself. I played it in the game. The next move he resigned, but black to checkmate here. Nice little variation on a very common theme. So I went up for 1, and we go to the next game, where xuanet was probably a little bit pissed or something because he pre-moved e5 out of the opening, and we just get this pawn sacrifice. And white's idea is that after, let's say, bishop g4, black tries to take the pawn, and he gets quick development, whereas white is a little lacking in development. As soon as white plays a move like h3, g3 gets weak. Something like this is just, and this is just showing something, some variations. And black is looking for tricks like this. So I'm always a bit reluctant to take the second pawn, and I just start to develop with knight f3, knight c3. And here he played knight c6, and I thought, okay, let's just give back the piece, the pawn, with h3. And if he moves the bishop, well, maybe then I can play g4 and bishop g2. Or even more aggressive, pawn f5, push for e6. So he decided to take back the pawn. But here you can see I have some control of the squares. Development is about the same. But white has the initiative, and that's just all I wanted in this position. He tried to trick me here. If I take this, there's knight at f3. Doesn't really matter if you take, but this is just winning the queen for black. So after at d4, I went knight d5 instead. He moved his knight back, and we got into this position. And maybe I should have played queen e2 here in between, but it shouldn't matter too much. after, let's say, knight e6. Maybe it was better, but I just like to play queen e2 to cover the bishop, and a queen trade. I'm inviting the queen trade as well, because black's king is much more in the open since I have the initiative. So he played queen e7, and now immediately can go after d7. Probably this was best, just to trade and then defend d7 with maybe knight at f6. But he tried to be aggressive, and that's just immediately lost since I take on c6. And if you take here, then knight b7 is coming, or you're gonna have to give up the queen. And here, well, I can go very aggressive with this, and this just winning as well. So yeah, I think knight at e3 is the blunder here. White is clearly better, but black is still in the game. But knight at e3, and now it's just game over. I'm just taking two pieces, and he doesn't have time to take them back. So we take on b7 for knight at c6. And here at d7, queen e8. And here I found a nice queen b5, f5, knight e4, checkmate. So with this game I was on match point. And spoiler alert, I'm gonna win next one as well. He had to win with white again. We go into the same line as we played before. And now he castled, as I was mentioning in the earlier games, that castling is an option as well. And then you don't have to take back on c3. I think you have to take on d5 then after castles. And then this is a possible variation where things are really wild. But apparently a little bit better for white. But black has some chances against the king. And we'll take this bishop next. But he took on c3, and that allows knight takes c3. And bishop g5. This was possible, but I wasn't really going for it. The idea is that the knight comes to f4, just to show you. And the attack is going to be strong. But I felt like not going for a very strange, weird position where xuanet might be good, using his creativity. So I just played at f6 here. It isn't really a problem, it's just not the best move according to the computer. Queen d2 and knight at e4, and now I just seem to be winning the piece. And he decided to give up the queen, so I thought, okay, let's just take it. Bishop takes. And here I thought, okay, now I have to be a little bit aggressive, otherwise the minor pieces might overrun the queen. As he can take this one as well. Oh. And knight h5 comes, and I might be in a little bit of trouble. You might wonder why he didn't take on g7 earlier. It doesn't really matter, it transposes, because I'm always going to play rook g8. And here I have this nice fork between the bishop on d2 and the bishop on c4, and if he takes I have another fork. So the queen on d4 is very powerful. He tried to defend this bishop somehow. If I take this, then he has ideas here. In this particular case, he's just lost because of this, and at e2 comes next. But it's something to think on. So I just played at e7, keeping it safe, no counterplay. And here I was not really paying attention, because here he had knight at h6, which was good. Again, he should not take here immediately because of this again, and losing. But he can play at d3, and if I take here, knight takes f6 is coming, and white is very strong here. So queen c5 should be played, and then you can play like this. And you have some counterplay with this move and knight e2. But the game is balanced again here, so this was allowing this knight h6 was bad. Not immediately losing. I think white can survive, or black can survive, but he didn't play it again. He should play it here in this position, but he played bishop at f8, and now I played rook at g5, and now it's no longer possible to play for knight at h6, because now it's going to be too slow. But he didn't spotted it the first few moves. And here is just cruising towards checkmate. I take on f1, take here. The idea is that if they block, you win with this knight e2 idea. A very common back rank theme. You help the queen with the knight, so the queen can just take the pieces. And then the knight is also nicely helping the checkmate in the end. So he played king e2 instead, queen e1. And I thought, okay, let's finish the game with a nice queen sacrifice. And knight e2 to checkmate in the end. Okay, so and this game got me into the candidate stage. We'll see how we'll do there. When it starts, I'll probably do some more of these recaps where I just go through my games and show them with some of my thoughts, if I have the time for that. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.